Hey guys, this is Woodshop Junkies, and in today's video I'm going to build a unit to maximize the functionality and storage capacity or capability of my small contractors type table saw within my small workshop. Now my little Makita table saw has not seen a lot of action since I've moved over to my restored AGS 10, but I'm not exactly ready to get rid of it just yet for a number of reasons. So I thought it would be a golden opportunity to test out a design that I've been sitting on for a couple of months, which would allow me to decrease the footprint of the saw by folding it into a vertical or stored position and moving it up against the wall where it will be out the way. The inspiration behind this design was to develop a table saw station for people that use their actual garages as weekend workshops. So they'll be able to store the bulkier tool in their workshop, or one of the bulkier tools in their workshops, like their table saws, in a folded out the way position when they need to use their garage as a garage. On weekends they can roll it out, fold it into a working position relatively easily, and pack it away just as easily when they are finished. The beauty of this project, like with many of my projects, lie in the simplicity of the design, and it doesn't require a crazy amount of expensive or complicated hardware. Most of the hardware I'll add to my Amazon storefront and link it down below. I'll also add plans to this project to my plans website if you guys want to create a version of this project for yourself. Keep in mind that not all table saws have the exact same dimensions for different brands or different models, so the dimensions on the plan might need a bit of tweaking to fit a different brand or different model table saw.
Having two table saws in a small single garage workshop really does not make sense, but as I said, I'm not 100% ready to get rid of the Makita just yet. That's why I designed this unit so I would be able to store the Makita in a way that I would still be able to get some sort of functionality out of the space I use to store the saw. When the saw is in its stored position, the storage unit can be used as a small mobile work surface, or I can use it to support overhang when sawing on my miter saw, or even as an outfeed support system when I'm using my thicknesser. I start this project by assembling what will ultimately become the main support structure of this project. The folding bed will be attached to it, as well as the sides of the enclosure. Now this is just a project for my workshop. It doesn't have to look fantastic as long as it's functional, so I'm screwing most of it together. I am using glue to make it a bit stronger, but I'm not going to waste too much time with complicated woodworking methods. For the side panels and the doors, I'm going with laminated pine. Probably not the best option. Plywood probably would have worked better, but I think the laminated pine looks a little bit nicer, so that's why I went with it.
Okay, so this is pretty much the basic framework or box for my table saw storage system. Over here I'm going to install a folding bed that's going to allow me to change my table saw from a horizontal working position to a vertical stored position. In the vertical position it will sit pretty much in this cavity over here, and I will install doors on this side, and a top at the top. So when the unit is packed away, it's going to look like a normal mobile shop cabinet or trolley, and it will also have additional functionality as a work surface or a small workbench.
Now I am looking at longer term storage of the saw because I'm not going to be using it that often at all. That is why I'm going for the complete enclosure of the saw, and obviously I have the work surface as a multifunctional option for the unit. Originally I was going to use a flat piece of plywood for the folding bed, but because the saw actually uses its base to evacuate sawdust and shavings, I went for a grid formation instead. On each side of the folding bed, I'm going to be installing stop blocks. On the sides of the enclosure or on the front doors, I'm going to install corresponding stop blocks. When the bed is folded into its working position, these blocks will rest on top of each other and I will be able to latch them together with toggle latches, and so securing the bed in its working position. To be able to actuate the folding mechanism or to fold the bed, I'm going to be installing 3 hinges. Now the saw itself is not insanely heavy and the hinges are only going to be supporting the weight when the saw is in its stored position. When the saw is in its working position, the folding bed would rest on the center support structure, and that will, well, take most of the weight.
Right, so this is pretty much the bed that the saw is going to be installed onto, and which is going to give it the ability to fold between a stored and working position. Now I went for this grid formation or grid assembly over having a solid piece of plywood because the saw actually has holes at the bottom where it ejects sawdust. So having it on a solid board makes it less effective. Now I'm also going to be making use of a variety of locking and latching mechanisms using some pretty standard hardware like these self-locking latches towards the back here, and then on the front here I'm going to add some toggle latches, and I might even add some gas struts to help support the weight. And the reason for this, the last thing I want is the saw dropping out while I am using it. So I am going to put safety on safety to secure this bed in its working position when I want to use it. So this is pretty much the folding bed that's going to allow me to change the saw from a working position to a stored position. These latches is an additional safety. The main securing latches are going to be installed on the other side of the folding bed. And then as I said, I'm going to look at getting some gas struts or installing some gas struts to assist with holding the weight on this side. Then when the saw is folded down into its stored position, the center of gravity will sit neatly within the enclosure with the top of the saw sitting close to flush with this edge over here. Now this part of the design created a bit of a problem for me because when I fold the bed into its working position, I will be shifting some of the weight of the saw over into this area. So if I add, for example, 4 casters underneath the enclosure so I can move it around, I would have nothing supporting the weight of the saw in this area over here. So if I apply pressure, it might tip over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to install 2 doors over here. Onto the doors, I'm going to add stop blocks. When the bed folds down, this section over here will fold onto the stop block and secure with a toggle latch. And to overcome my center of gravity issue, I'm going to try something which might be a good idea, might be a bad idea. We'll see how it goes. But onto the doors, I'm also going to install my casters, which means that when I open the doors, I'm going to be increasing the footprint and still be able to keep the center of gravity or the main weight of the saw in between the 4 casters. So let's see how it goes.
Now, shortly after saying it out loud, I changed my mind. Putting the casters on the doors is not going to be ideal. I am going to stiffen up the doors using piano hinges because they are going to be subjected to a bit of weight when the unit is in its working position. But instead of casters, I'm going to look at a different stabilization option. Now, because this unit doesn't really have any support structure towards its top, like a fixed top, I'm going to rely on a series of toggle latches to keep everything in shape when the unit is in its stored position.
Right, Alright, so that's the two front doors now installed. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it was my intention to install two of the four caster wheels on the doors. So when the door opens, it would increase the footprint of the four casters. But in the last few minutes, I've changed my mind and I've decided to rather install all four casters underneath the main enclosure, and I will look at a different option for stabilizing the doors when they are in their open or working position. Now the bottom of the unit is open, and I'm going to leave it open to prevent buildup of sawdust and shavings within the enclosure. So I don't really have a proper flat surface to mount casters. To overcome this, I glued 3 planks together, and out of this I'm going to cut blocks that I can mount to the unit, and this will give me a surface that I can mount my caster wheels to. Right, so I'm pretty much ready to add the saw, but before I do, I want to add the gas struts while I have the unit on the table here. Then I can add the saw before adding the finishing touches, which is the top and the doors at the back. Okay, so the single strut seems to be quite strong. I may not need a second strut, but I'm going to get the saw on here and see how it handles the weight before making my final decision. So the mechanism seems to work as I had intended, and the single gas strut does a good job at supporting the weight of the saw. The locks at the back engage and disengage fairly easily. Now, even though the bulk of the weight is sitting on the far side of the balance point, there is a bit of a stability issue, as I mentioned earlier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to install these kick down door stops on the doors so that when they are in their open or working position, I can step these down onto the floor and it will give me the stability I need. When the saw is folded back into its stored position, these can be disengaged and I can close the doors and the unit will once again be mobile thanks to the casters. These kickdown stops weren't really part of my original design, so the ones I got do not have a sufficient stroke length to reach the floor or the ground, so I have to make up these adapter plates to allow them to function. Now these kickdown stops aren't really designed for what I am using them for here, so I really would have to test the application over time. If their performance isn't what I expected or satisfactory, I can always consider a different mechanism or even retractable casters which are better suited to handling the weight. That is something to keep in mind if you are planning on replicating this project. Okay, so that's the two front doors installed now with the kickdown stops, and at this stage the unit is usable because I can stabilize it when it is in its working position, but I still want to install the two back doors and the top. The top is going to double as an outfeed support system when the unit is in its working position because I would be securing the top to the two back doors that are obviously going to be open, and so I'm going to be able to support stock feeding out at the back side of the saw. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the enclosure. All that's left now is to add the top. As I said, the purpose of the top is to provide me with a small work surface that I can use for whatever reason or whatever application within my small workshop when I am using this unit as a storage system for my saw. When the saw is in its working position, the top becomes outfeed support for the saw. Now the top isn't actually fixed to the unit, it simply secures with toggle latches because it needs to be removable to allow the operation of the folding mechanism, but also so that it can be secured as a outfeed support system or as an outfeed configuration.
Now, besides acting as a storage system for the table saw and also doubling as a small work surface when the saw is stored, it also increases the functionality of the saw by providing outfeed support.
Right, so that's pretty much it for my small workshop table saw storage system. Now, I designed it to store my saw for longer periods of time, and while the saw is stored, it can double as a work surface or as a trolley that I can use to support overhang or whatever the case may be, so that the space used to store the saw is still functional within the workshop. Now, I have also designed a compact version of this project, which is intended more for a person that would use their saw more often. It won't have doors and a top and all that kind of stuff. It is simply the mechanism that would allow the user to fold it into a working position, use the saw and fold it on its side to decrease the footprint and move it up against the wall when it needs to be stored. So let me know if you guys want to see that version, and I'll try and do a video on that as well. But that's pretty much it for this video. I'm quite pleased with the results. The saw is stored and the area or the space is still functional. Now I'm going to add some overhang support on the sides that can fold out and support wider stock, and I'll try and squeeze in a video on that pretty soon. And I also need to get started on my new benches to truly maximize my small workshop. So if you guys aren't subscribed yet and you want to see that, you should do that now. But that's pretty much it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I will be back really soon with some more content, but for now, thank you so much for watching. Till next time. Cheers.